Catholic Lecture 61 is a question and answer session that I titled Human Perception of Spiritual Reality, meaning that it juxtaposes how humans think and describe things with what may be true spiritually. This week, too, I focused on deconstruction, how it precedes construction. That's logical. Of course, you have to take something apart to construct it. Even if you're constructing something on bare land, you have to prepare the land. You have to modify the land to meet the requirements of the new thing you're building. Very few things can be just plopped on top of existing situations with no prep, no planning, no changes of any kind. This led me into a discussion with a few people that wasn't, for me, it revealed an interesting form of fantasy and denial that is practiced on a very, very subtle level by people who are in other areas of their spirituality and their thinking, morals, ethics, emotional control and management, ego, all of this, where they may be quite advanced. There is still a layer of fantasy or denial, and where it shows up is in trying to violate what is listed in PC10, which is spiritual principles. They list 9 of them, and there's a larger paper that goes into all this. And one of the 9 principles is that you cannot skip a step. But people think that because they understand a concept intellectually, that they don't have to work at it. They don't have to take it apart. They don't have to deconstruct it. They can just take this new idea and put it on top of what they already have. Now, perhaps there's a little bit of laziness here, which is not a terrible thing. It's nice to find the most efficient way to learn or advance in something. Where it tends to show up in spirituality is when people want to hold on to advanced principles without having done the legwork. Now, how does that look in pathwork? I'm focusing on lecture 61. There are 258. If you look at the entire catalog of lectures, it has been noted that the first, let's say, 30 or so are generic. They're about how the spirit world is constructed, what's going on. It's an explanation of spirit, man, what we're doing here, etc. And then the guide shifts gears. And when he shifts gears, he also reveals that he's actually the spokesman for a group. He's not speaking as an individual spirit. He's leading or speaking for a group of spirits that has decided to bring this information forward. And what he says is that there needs to be more work done on the psychological level, on the human level of emotions and looking at experiences. And from give or take 30 till around 165, there's a focus on psychology, on where all this stuff comes from, on self-confidence, self-esteem, childhood hurts, relationships with people, images, what you have in your mind, perception. All these things are basically the groundwork of pathwork. Then it moves into more global aspects, and give or take, starting with 200 for the last 60 lectures, it talks about the ascendance of mankind, where we're headed. It talks about levels of perception, levels of conscious control, levels of willingness to align with the will of God that are beyond most people. And it's not meant to diminish, it's just that that's the ideal. In any syllabus, you would want beginner, medium, and advanced information. So the series in the 200s tends to be more advanced, meaning you need to do the prior work before you can really understand the later work. It is difficult to surrender to God when you're holding reactions about your childhood. There's a part of you that's still wrapped up in that and attached. So I'm going to go back to the fantasy and denial aspect of this is thinking you can just do the advanced work and it will bleed down. It will take care of the other stuff. The way the lectures are constructed, that's not the presumption. The presumption is you do the individual work. You do the personal work of what your blocks are, what stands in your way, your goals, ambitions, your dreams, your perception of the world. You do that, and then you can move into higher levels of spiritual development, to use that phrase. So that it is fantasy or wishful thinking, which is covered in Pathwick Lecture 98 on wishful daydreaming. It is wishful thinking to think that we can just move ahead when some aspects haven't been covered. Now, the corollary in psychology is very similar, and that is that most people have skipped a step. Most people have not fully developed. And while you may have done some of the work on a child development level, you didn't do it all. You didn't, I was about to say wipe it out, but what I mean is you didn't do it thoroughly. There's still leftovers there. So it's not that you have to stay in that child place. You can advance into adulthood, but eventually you'll need to address any aspects of you that haven't fulfilled the optimum child development, such as attachment. If there's still a need to attach that is more on the infant level than the adult level, the ability to say no, the terrible twos where you say no. If you haven't fully developed your capacity to say no, how can you truly say yes? So at whatever level you haven't done that work of the 2-year-old, of the 1-year-old, of the 6-month-old, etc., all through childhood, to the level that you have not completed that step thoroughly, you may need to go back and do some more work. And the same thing is true in spiritual principles. The second aspect in this section is that your gauge, well, where am I? How am I doing? What do I need to do? That your gauge is not comfort. It is not a gauge to say, I'm fine. I don't see anything. Nothing bothers me in this area. It's also not what attracts you, because if you're attracted to spiritual development or a certain idea, that's not a gauge of how developed you are. It's an indication of where your growth may be next, but not a gauge of where you are. Anybody can have interest in an advanced idea, and the ideal would be that they would be attracted to do the work that would thoroughly cement that idea in their psyche. So what is the gauge? And the guide suggests that the gauge is whatever makes you want to turn away. Anything that you withdraw from, cringe from, contract from, is a gauge as to whether you have completed that thoroughly, looked at it thoroughly, whether there are unconscious bits and pieces left over to work on. So use that for a week or so. Notice what topics makes you tighten up that you don't have in conversation, that you avoid with people. Or most importantly, what do you avoid thinking about? What do you avoid feeling? So, for instance, if you say, that bothers me, I just don't think about that. That's an obvious one. But it's not so obvious to say something bothers me so much, I would rather not go into it right now. It sounds like you would be willing to do it later, but that can also be a way of just pushing it off and pushing it off with no real intention to go back to it. And that's what I mean by there are levels of fantasy and denial and wishful thinking in advanced path work ideas that aren't apparent. The words don't sound like someone is imagining things or denying, and yet the reality is they're not willing to do all the work that's necessary. One of the questions in this section was, or statements, was that there are people who are here to share. They're here specifically to give rather than receive or develop. Does not mean that they escape development. It means that they have an overriding desire to really share significantly. And that may lead them to do a lot of personal work so that they can. Some people are able to give more early. Some people are able to give earlier than others. And so the question is, who do you know or who have you encountered in your life? You may not know them personally. Who have you encountered in your life who may have come here with the spiritual desire to spread light and truth, and who has done the work to do that effectively? Who walks the talk for the specific purpose of sharing with others ideas on how to do it for themselves? So I found it interesting that there was an extra sentence. They are not necessarily famous. So think of so-called ordinary people that you have encountered, that you've heard of, that have been in your community, that you have had peripheral knowledge of, whom you remember as being particularly gifted, particularly generous, or remarkably self-assured in a really grounded way. And to look at, is that something you would like to do? Is that attractive to you? And then if you have the opportunity, you might ask people how they got there. How'd you manage it? How do you do it? My experience of knowing genuinely good people is that they aren't afraid of the work of doing it every single day, examining their motives, taking care, not giving in to lower self urges or desires, of questioning themselves and holding a standard in front of them that they would like to meet, rather than thinking they got there and coasting. The last point was, well, why would you want to be here on the planet now versus later? What are all these people doing here? What am I doing here? Why now, when things are so difficult? And the answer was, people choose when to enter as an incarnation. Occasionally, and this was in a prior lecture, occasionally the timing is chosen for them because they're a little bit too immature to figure out what's best for them. So they're treated like children. But for spirits who have participation in their incarnatory plan, the reason they're here now is because this particular situation on the planet, these particular difficulties, social unrest, global stuff, climate change, in between major wars, but with minor wars that perhaps are worse because they're harder to define. All of this may be optimum for what they're trying to develop. And that makes the difference between a so-called successful human life and a successful spiritual life. So people are here because they have a chance to really stretch, to grow. And stretching and growing creates aches and pains. You have good days and bad days, up days and down days. You get injured, you have to recover. It's not a steady flow. So that's why so many people are here. They believe that there's an opportunity here, and they've raised their hands to take that opportunity. Again, you might look at people and seek to define the difference between people who really understand that on a conscious level and embrace it, and those who can understand the theory, and there's always a but this, but that, but the other, and if I were in charge, I would have picked a different time. And the joke is you are in charge, and this is the time that you picked. So thanks for listening. Hope you read Pathfic Lecture 61.